We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA.
Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
Welcome back to Notify America. All right, so last night CNN held a town hall with presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, and the topic of government overreach came up, specifically around the events that happened during and after J6. And if you ever watched a CNN town hall, you know how the moderator acts, right? They try to stand up on their high horse and act as a fact checker in real time. But what do you think happens when the facts don't line up with your ontological reality? Well, you begin to melt down, because that's what happened last night. Vivek came loaded with facts about U.S. government overreach, systematically dismantling CNN's narrative. Now, we're going to play the clip in a minute. We'll play the full clip for you, all right, because it's fire. The host, Abbey Phillips, seems to have a conniption each time he says something or asks a question about government involvement, about FBI involvement. She tries to stop him from speaking for like 3 minutes straight. It's like she doesn't want the words said. It's just odd when you think about it. It's like watching the thought police in action. And when she realizes, by the way, that Vivek came armed with facts, she just melts down. But first, part of this story that too often gets overlooked is what happened after that day, the government overreach that took place following that day. Because even if you believe what they say, it doesn't justify what happened after. The only way to put it, is extreme government overreach and like an overreaction, which did not occur organically, by the way. It didn't occur from like anger or something like that. It turns out it was done on purpose. The overreach, the heavy hand of the state that we all witnessed during the investigation, thousands of FBI agents reassigned to track down normal, everyday Americans, tax-paying Americans, people with families who never committed a crime before, most of them. Their only crime was trespassing onto the grounds of the Capitol that day. We're not talking about the thugs who broke windows and stuff like that. We're talking about the people who innocently went to the rally and ended up being waved into the Capitol by police, which there's video of, walked around, and left. Those are the people who were visited at their homes by the FBI in the days and weeks after, arrested and treated as being part of a crime that they really had no part in, many of whom were perp walked in front of cameras, arrested in front of their families, all in the aim of sending a message, creating a narrative, even at the expense of people who had no part in any violence whatsoever. We saw multiple FBI agents decide to blow the whistle about this to Congress, remember? About the behavior of their colleagues and the orders that they got from their supervisors, how there were thousands of agents reassigned to track down and arrest these people, reassigned from work that they say actually matters, and the overreach doesn't stop there. It turns out there are now allegations that these same people who were arrested weren't given access to the evidence that exonerates them from their alleged crime. Imagine if you were there, right, and you walked into the Capitol after police waved you inside and you weren't able to show that footage at your trial, even though the footage existed, even though the prosecutor knows that the footage exists, or that the government knows it exists. Well, that in itself would be a crime. It's wrong. And we know this because prior to the release of the 200 hours of footage from that day, from all the cameras combined, by the way, amounted to around 200 hours of footage. Well, only 12 hours of footage was released until very recently. The remaining footage was only released after the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, won the speakership a few weeks ago. And I have my other issues with Mike Johnson, how he's funding additional money to Ukraine, funding a bunch of stuff, which he promised he wouldn't do. But on this, he did the right thing. Releasing all the footage paints a different picture, especially for the people who were prosecuted for trespassing and interrupting an official proceeding. That was the charge for most of them. The footage, it doesn't answer all the questions, but it sure does raise some new ones, which is what Vivek addressed last night. Take a listen to this. Watch this.
So let me ask you about something that you said at the debate last week. You used the phrase inside job to describe what happened on January 6th. The next day, Capitol rioter Alan Hostetter highlighted your comments at his sentencing. He is going to prison for 11 years. Hostetter threatened members of Congress. He brought a hatchet, knives, pepper spray, stun batons, tactical gear to the U.S. Capitol. Are you concerned that a convicted felon like that is now promoting your comments in court?
So here's my concern, Abby, and I want to tell you guys where I'm at. If you had told me, it's close to 3 years ago that January 6, 2021 happened. If you had told me 3 years ago, back when I was a biotech CEO, not steeped in this world, I was just consuming passive media, but was focused on my world of developing medicines. If you had told me that January 6 was in any way an inside job, the subject of government entrapment, I would have told you that was crazy talk. Fringe conspiracy theory nonsense. I can tell you now, having gone somewhat deep in this, it's not. I mean, the reality is this. We do have a government, first of all, we have to acknowledge, that has lied to us systematically over the last several years about the origin of COVID-19, about the Hunter Biden laptop that we were told was false by 51 CIA experts and otherwise before we now know that it was true. You can go straight down the list, the Trump-Russia disinformation collusion hoax, all of it. Now we come to January 6th. The reality is we know that there were federal law enforcement agents in that field. We don't know how many. I think it's shameful. If I may finish just answering,
well, let me
this is really important.
I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you here because
I know this, the establishment doesn't approve of this message. I know
that there were federal agents.
We should be able to talk about this.
You're saying that there were federal agents.
This is important to talk about.
You are saying there were federal agents in the crowd on January 6th.
Yep.
There is no evidence that there were federal agents in the crowd on January 6th.
So why, before Congress, when pressed on what the number was, they didn't say there were none? They just couldn't say how many there were.
So you're saying that that you have not seen any evidence that there were.
We've seen multiple informants suggesting that there were. We know people were FBI informants who were asked to do this.
Is there any evidence?
May I just finish this, and you can come back and question me?
Well, let me clarify.
I know it's very uncomfortable for you.
I'm going to clarify my question.
I know this is an uncomfortable issue for many people, but we have to do the truth here.
I'm going to clarify my question because I want to make sure that you understand what I'm asking.
I understand this deeply. And I told you, I was with you 3 years ago. I'm not there now.
Where is the evidence?
Yes.
Where is the evidence that the government had applied an inside job?
But no, I'm going to tell you what an inside job is, because I'm not
violence on January 6th.
I'm not going to let you put words in my mouth. I'm going to put my words in my mouth. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that.
Where is the evidence that the government was involved in planning or executing January 6th?
So I'm going to give you hard facts. And if I may, Abby, I know this is going to be a little uncomfortable, but we're going to go through this, and you can push back on it after that. And you can push back on that. And let's do this fairly. Why did they suppress footage of now what's been released, 200 hours of footage of shooting rubber bullets into that crowd, shooting tear gas into that crowd? You didn't see that before. You saw what the response was to that. Now you see footage coming out of actually rolling out the red carpet for Capitol Police allowing people in,
again,
right through the front door.
The vast majority of the footage
evidence should have been released before, Abby.
Mr. Ramaswamy, the vast majority of the footage shows police officers being overrun
and I want to talk about one more
by
case.
violent
this is really important.
rioters. That's
I'm going to give you some hard facts.
Of it shows.
So here's what entrapment is.
Cherry pick.
I'm not cherry picking. If I may finish, Abby. If I may finish, Abby. I'm not cherry picking.
Examples.
To the contrary. To the contrary. You know who cherry picked? You know who cherry picked? The government.
That is what happened.
The government cherry picked 12 hours of footage when there was 200 hours of footage. So cherry picking was the government, not me. Release the whole thing. And let me just finish one thing too, because this is super important as a topic.
So I
think this is a civil libertarian issue of our time.
Gretchen
Whitmer's kidnapping. I want to be really clear on this, because it's the same issue in the same FBI, same even part of the FBI. 3 people who were in an alleged plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer were acquitted at the end of trial because it was entrapment. That is, government agents put them up to do something they otherwise wouldn't have done. They gave them credit cards with spending limits of up to $5,000, encouraged them to buy munitions, plan something they weren't otherwise willing to plan. So much so, and I want people at home to know this, especially CNN viewers to know this, is that one of the jurors went to those defendants and apologized afterwards, gave him a hug, apologized, seeing what the government had put a poor guy up to, who had to go to some Mexican restaurant across the street to get hot water. These people were exploited with credit cards up to $5,000, FBI agents putting them up to a kidnapping plot that we were told was true but was entrapment. Same thing with the Capitol Police, people letting them in freely. Many of those people then being charged.
Look,
the government cannot put you up to do something and then charge you for it. That's wrong.
I don't want to have
to. Wrong to the left or the right. I don't want
to have to interrupt you. I really don't. But I don't want you to mislead the audience here or at home.
I think they've been misled by the mainstream media.